This is House Planning Help episode 207. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up, it's a solo session on my own project, looking at the tender process, and Kay and I receive our tender returns. When you're doing a self-build, this is definitely the case that there's something at that moment that you've got to focus on. Until it gets sorted, that is the issue. Once you tick off that item or concern, then the next priority surfaces. And so I thought this was quite an interesting one that we're dealing with at the moment, considering that our heating and hot water system has all been designed. But we're suddenly thinking about flow rates again. You see, Kay's worried about the shower, that it's going to be a dribbling shower because we're going all eco. So what does a flow rate mean? 5 litres a minute, 10 litres per minute, 15 litres per minute? All of these figures are pretty meaningless unless you have a sense of what they actually mean. And you might remember that I raised this in my chat with mechanical services engineer Alan Clark a few weeks back.
I think there's some diminishing returns as you go for more and more water. The extra pleasure and enjoyment becomes less and less.
So where's that sweet spot?
I think it's probably around, but maybe I'm being very stingy if I say about 10 litres per minute and someone else will say it's more than that.
What Alan suggested is that we measure the flow rate of a few showers just to give ourselves a better understanding of what they mean. And it's not difficult to do. You get a bucket, you put it under the shower head, and then time perhaps 10 seconds and multiply that across a minute so that you'll know how much you've used. We were at my parents' house the other day and we measured that one, 13 litres a minute. In the rental property here, it's 10 litres a minute, and I think our system at the moment is planned for 9 litres a minute. It does get slightly confusing because you've got a hot and cold water mix. And the other thing to bear in mind is that there's part of building regulations, part G, which was introduced in 2010, saying that each person in the house has an allowance. So it would be 125 litres of water per person per day, 5 of which are outside. Who uses their outside water allowance? And so if you start tinkering at one end of the spectrum, so perhaps really bumping up the shower, you'd have to reduce the water pressure of the taps, for example, to compensate. So really interesting. I never knew about all of this, and we're just trying to fathom out what's a way forwards. I think we've got it. What you don't want to do is kit out the whole house, get all the plumbing in, and then discover it's an issue. So you want to make sure you're happy. I think we're just about there. But hopefully we're not reverting all of the eco features that we're trying to build in. And the good thing is that I know that I still have my 3-minute showers pretty much. In fact, I was so tempted before this episode to see, am I hitting the 3-minute mark? Because I'm in that shower, I'm straight out. So hopefully I can use less of my 125 litres of water a day. No baths. Let's get into today's episode on our tender returns. And if you haven't heard it already, it will probably make sense to check out episode 205. First of all, in there, I chatted to Dan Higginbotham from Parsons Whittley, they're our architecture firm, about putting together the tender package for this self-build. It includes things like the floor plans, sections, details of penetrations, a joinery schedule, electrical plans, a schedule of works. And to give you a flavour of that, this is just a tiny, tiny bit of us going through that documentation before it went out to tender, because Kay and I needed to check it.
Okay.
Cool, there's a lot of stuff in
there
there, isn't there?
There is a lot of stuff. This is why I got them printed A1, because it was almost impossible to read otherwise.
So we've got to go through all these tiny little bits of text. And what
well,
do
a lot
they
of
say?
this is for the builders. But
we have
things like
authorised all of this, haven't we?
kitchen's the wrong...
Yes, that's a very quick one that we can correct, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because that's been updated.
It has indeed. Yeah, there is an awful lot of information.
First floor plan, 1 to 50.
This is the key over here.
All the way over there.
Yeah,
have to bring back the piece of paper.
All internal dimensions are taken parallel from faces of studwork. Studwork partition thicknesses as stated in accordance with consulting engineer's design. Note external opening sizes to be subject to final joinery detailing. CDM mitigation notes. Careful consideration is needed over the handling and lifting of the triple glazed joinery. General materials legend. We've got a smoke detector and a heat detector. So what do these mean?
Provide new inspection chambers as shown thus and as specified. New IC.
Inspection chamber. Is that something to
But
do
this
with
is outside the
supply?
house, isn't it?
Yeah.
As you can probably tell, some of these notes we can understand, some are just double Dutch and perhaps not intended for us anyway, they're for our potential contractor. If it takes us a long time to skim through it, just see if we can spot any errors that might be jumping out at us, just imagine what it must take someone quoting for this work. If you've run a service-based business before, you have probably done many, many quotes, and you'll know that they can be frustrating at times. You need them to win the work. But just imagine doing a quote on this scale where I think you could quite happily sit down for a day going through all these notes, and then you've also got to price up different items. I know, obviously, it's a long amount of work that you're taking on, so it should pay off too. Definitely a podcast in this one. We'll come back at some point. To set the scene, Kay and I travelled to the offices of Parsons Whitley in Swaffham, our 3-month-old daughter in tow, and you may get a bit of input from her in today's episode as well. Our mood? Excited? Nervous? We just don't know how today's going to go. Might go in our favour or it could go against us. Dan Higginbotham is in the meeting room too. First, though, I asked Chris Parsons, the boss at Parsons Whitley, to explain the tender process.
So this is a traditional procurement route, which is where we, working for you, prepare all of the detailed specifications, highly detailed, as you'll have seen with the drawings. We tend to work quite hard to get all that detail together. So a very detailed drawing package, a very detailed specification. And then that means that the contractors know exactly what they've got to price. When we open these envelopes today, we'll see prices for exactly the same thing. So we can pretty much compare oranges with oranges. So we've got a really accurate package, which also helps when we get to actually build, because we've answered hopefully as many questions as we can before they get started on site. It helps the contractor to plan his work because he can see exactly what he's got to do, because there's a lot of detail there, so he can get well planned and therefore operate more efficiently.
And this is all in confidence once we go into the tender process. I was quite surprised by that.
Yes, so what's going to happen is that we're going to open some envelopes today which will indicate what each contractor wants to do the project. We keep that information confidential until we actually enter into contract. But once we have entered into contract, we do release those numbers so that the contractors get some feedback and know whereabouts they were. But we don't do that until we've entered into contract, because there will inevitably be a situation where we may want to value engineer, we might want to change something, and we're going to go back. We might go back to the lowest two, perhaps, or whatever. That's a decision to be made, to ask them to vary their prices, to just adjust it to finally get it down to what we want it to be. And that process needs to be done in order to preserve the commercial advantage you have. It needs to be done in secrecy. So we don't want the other contractors, for example, knowing today what everybody's prices are. So we keep that just confidential until we've actually resolved, yes, here is the contract sum, sign up for a contract. Then we'll tell everybody these were the tenders that we received.
And I love the idea of putting everything in a form of finality, that this is exactly what we want. But I know full well that there are certain little things that are just thinking, oh my goodness, will we need to change that? So how does that get managed?
Yeah, that's actually a really valid point, because no matter how hard you try, there will be changes. Some will be driven perhaps by stuff we hadn't fully anticipated. Some might be by yourselves when you see stuff going up and think, oh, it's not quite what we wanted. So managing that change is really important. We obviously have procedures for doing that. You might come to me and say, I want to change this, at which point we will try to ascertain exactly what the cost of that change will be before we instruct the contractor to actually execute the change, so that you can make an informed decision. Yes, I do want to do this, or I hadn't realised it would cost that much. Because the worst thing is particularly a client going on site and going, actually, I don't want that door there. Can you move it and put it over there? Contractors, being contractors, will be very helpful, and they go, yes, certainly, we'll do that for you now. And then when the final account comes in, it was like, £1,000 and you thought it was £100. So it's important to just make sure that we understand what the implications are of any proposed change, and make sure that you're informed so you can make an informed decision.
These actual documents, I know that they don't get submitted till fairly late on. So why is that? Is that for this confidentiality?
You mean the tender prices that are coming back now?
What are we going to get back?
You will probably get very little today, I'm afraid. You'll probably get one sheet of paper with a sum at the bottom and an indication of how long they're going to want to build it, because they're the two questions we've really asked them. We do ask that they actually return with their tender a fully detailed and priced tender specification. In reality, despite asking for it, you very rarely get it at tender opening. Most contractors will keep that back, either because they've priced it in a different way and therefore they can't easily produce that document, or the skeptic in me thinks that actually by holding it back, if they get a telephone call from me this afternoon asking for their price specification, they get an early indication that they're in the running. So I think there's probably two things at play there. So although we'll have asked for a price specification, don't hold out your hopes for one this morning.
And what, in terms of people who've dropped out, is that common?
It's becoming more common. It's disappointing, particularly because we did quite a lot of work in speaking to the tender list to make sure they were keen, that they wanted to price it, and were they happy to do so. I think one has been a family bereavement, so fair play, we understand that. The other one, just we may still get a tender. We just haven't been able to get in touch with them over the last few days, so we don't really know what's happening. So that is disappointing. I'm pleased that we had a reasonable sized tender list so that we're not left with limited choice.
And a quick word on that list and how it was put together. Where possible, we went with recommendation. I'm always trying for that if I can. What's interesting is I didn't feel as well connected with builders as I do with architects, and even some people I thought who might be able to help me source a solid contractor in the area actually said we don't have any recommendations, or we don't feel comfortable recommending anyone. So we had to look elsewhere, come up with a couple of other ideas. I went for some people with passive house experience, so I thought this looks good on paper. We were also keen, if possible as well, that it would be a local firm, because it just makes sense. They're on your doorstep. They're not going to have a massive carbon footprint coming to and from the site. So the clock is ticking and we arrived a little bit early. I just didn't think anything of it at all, because I imagined starting at 11:15 instead of midday just really wouldn't make any difference at all.
What you'll find is that they very often leave it to the last minute. Well, because what they're concerned about is that if they bring it to me early and I open it early, and I would really like contractor Y to do the job, I could phone contractor Y and I could say to him, I've got a tender here and it's X, so if you make yours X minus, you'll win the job. Right. So they really try to deliver their tenders pretty close to the time that you've asked. In fact, it's not been unknown for them to sit outside the architect's office and see who else is taking the envelope in.
Oh, right. Okay. I wasn't anticipating any of this. So is this coming via email, or are people going to be here, or what?
Normally we would say no to email, but one person who is from away has asked, and we have accepted that he can send us an email. The others we're expecting, I think, down 2 envelopes, of which we've got 1 at the moment.
So how do they know that this process is all legitimate from our perspective? Or is that what you're saying, that just to protect their own interests coming in late?
Well, obviously there's a code of practice that we're going to adhere to, because we're a professional practice, so we're going to do it properly.
So it says who?
Yeah, good question. I'm not sure who produces the code of practice, to be honest.
But it's one of the bodies.
It's one I've lived under for many years, so I kind of know it. And so, yeah, there's a procedure laid down for the invitation and receipt of tenders. There's a procedure laid down for what we do once we've opened them. There's a procedure laid down for if there are errors within the tender price, how do we adjust it, etc., etc. It is all laid down and quite formalised. And how do they know that we're going to adhere to it? Well, I guess my professional reputation, I hope. If I didn't adhere to it, then trust me, people would soon know that we aren't a trustworthy practice. So most architectural practices obviously run this thing as absolutely above board as they can, because it's the one area where, if you didn't, then it could be very unfair for some people.
So what are the first part of the procedures then that we're going to come across? You mentioned all sorts of guidelines, so how will it play out, this first section?
So from your point of view, we're simply going to, hopefully at 12 o'clock, we're going to have the prices that we're expecting back in an envelope. We will open them. We'll probably ask you to open them, just so you can see that they remain in the sealed envelope. We've got a form that we immediately fill in with what are the numbers. We'll check to see whether they've qualified their tender in any way, because occasionally they might go, oh, we couldn't get this roof tile, so we've priced for this, or we haven't allowed for so and so. If they qualify it, then we need to understand exactly what that qualification is, so that we know what we're comparing when we look at these initial prices. You'll recover from a short period of shock.
Well, that's it, because this is a surprise for you then as well.
It's
This is,
as much a surprise to us as it is to you, I'm afraid.
Okay.
And then, there'll be a discussion as to, well, that's good. Actually, I can afford to have all those things that I wanted, or maybe it'll be, or maybe I can't have so-and-so because it's looking a bit expensive. So we'll then have a discussion as to how that fits, how the prices fit with your budget, and determine how we might go forward from there.
Because it is tricky with our build too, that being a passive house, there are certain bits that we need, and we've obviously got quite a simple form factor, and what isn't simple is for a reason and for planning and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So we've, you told us what your budget was right at the start. We've done our best to try to design within that budget, and we've kept it as a simple form, so that should produce some, reasonably cost-effective prices. But we have been seeing some horrific tender returns just lately, I think we've advised.
Our budget is £400,000, and there wasn't a great amount we could do than wait. We have to let those minutes tick by. And in some ways, it felt a little bit old-fashioned, this waiting for everything to happen in the modern digital world. We did have one email that was printed out downstairs and folded up and then brought up to us, and then a couple of envelopes that were sitting waiting for midday. And midday came about. We started with the envelopes, and Kate was given that task of revealing the figures.
Here comes the first one. So we're opening up the smaller one of the two. It's received on the 31st of October. So, please find my tender return form enclosed. At the time of sending the tender, we are in a position to start works within 4 to 6 weeks. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Proposed construction, blah, 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 address, I hereby offer to execute the works described in the schedule of works for the sum of £612,000.
Ooh.
Ouch. So £612,234. Ouch.
Okay.
And 4 to 6 weeks.
Well, 4 to 6 weeks is good, but yeah.
And he thinks, I hereby offer to execute the works described in the schedule of works and on the tender drawings within 39 weeks of commencement. So, the big one. Okay, they've enclosed a completed form of tender, collection page, day works, bill of quantities, preliminaries, both fixed and time related. We currently have allowed for a 35-week programme, including 2-week Christmas shutdown. They are coming in at £885,871.23. Over double our budget.
Is this Hertfordshire prices, do you think,
Oh
some of
my
this?
good God. Wow.
The worrying thing is they are the most qualified out of the list, so they know what's involved.
So we've opened the two envelopes and we move on to contractor 3. It's the email next. Are we going to get lucky? Short answer, no.
And they are coming in at £744,385. Oh, how disappointing.
There's a big spread here as well. 612 to 885 is a huge spread. I'm not comfortable with this.
As clients, we weren't comfortable with this either. It was a massive shock. Our returns were starting at £2,400 per square metre, and I always thought £2,000 a square metre would get you a pretty decent house. Unless you're specifying something ridiculous, we're going to have marble steps everywhere. That was generous. Clearly, I'm not in touch with where things are at the moment. Now, I could play you a number of different clips of us moping around. However, I don't think it adds to the story that much. And really what we needed was some time to let this sink in and to think clearly. Chris also had a plan of action for the next steps, which was to look at contractor 1's pricing in more detail. That's the £616,000 figure. And also consider what savings could be made.
My recommendation is that we explore some value engineering savings, see what we can get it down to, and there'll be some decisions for you to make, really. We'll be able to save 10 grand here and 5 grand there, but there might be things you don't want to save them on. So, but we will be fairly ruthless in making suggestions, and you will need to be adamant about what you want to keep and what you don't want to keep.
You think there's no advantage of going through all this again because it's going to be something similar?
I think it's the definition of insanity is to keep asking the same question, hoping you're going to get a different answer.
Just before we wrap up today, we've talked about 4 different companies. 1 pulled out and we've heard the 3 other returns. So we had 5. What happened to that last company? Well, we tried to get in touch with them in the run up to that tender deadline, heard absolutely nothing. And then the following day, their return came in. It was a figure of £664,000. Of course, it had to be disqualified straight away. So we're going to pick this up again in the next session, looking at it from a slightly different angle. Where on earth are we going to make those savings? Show notes today, just with a summary, as we normally do, houseplanninghelp.com/207. Maybe you have a comment or a question that you'd like to ask. Well, I'll do my best to answer it. Just head to the bottom of the show notes. Once again, houseplanninghelp.com/207. I think we scored highly on the drama front in this episode, didn't we? Or for me, at least. Finally today, if you enjoyed this episode on my own project, just remember we're doing quite a few more videos throughout this process. I am vlogging, if you know that term, throughout the build, and it's a little bit rough around the edges, somewhat like a video diary, but we're putting these onto the YouTube channel so you can go and check them out whenever you fancy that. We'll embed it into the show notes as well if it's easier for you to come this way. My own project as well will be our 3rd in-depth video case study in the hub. There's a slightly different slant to that because it will be more decision-based, as we always do, trying to bring a lot more technical detail to it. And in the hub, the whole idea is just prepping you up so that when you get to your build, whatever stage you're at, you're in control and you're hopefully not going to make any of the major blunders. There will be things that will come up. They always do. And also in the hub, the other big thing is we try to surround you with like-minded self-builders, each intent on building their own eco-home in the UK. And there's another aspect too. We try to make this fun because there can be a lot of technical information coming your way or people trying to sell you kit. What we're trying to do is inform you, make it entertaining though as well. All sorts of videos to get stuck into. houseplanninghelp.com/join. We love you in the hub. Next time, value engineering and value engineering firsthand. What does it mean for a project like ours? Kay and I discuss how we're going to move forwards. That's it. Thank you so much for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.